Hi everyone, welcome to Future Fossil. This is our third video working on our picnic blanket squares, and the theme for this one is going to be themed around time. So it's a huge topic to think about, so we're going to go through how we're going to make up some design ideas based on the huge subject that is time. First of all, I'm going to show you my example piece. Now this is a piece I did a little while ago, and it's looking at time and thinking about the past. So from what we've got here, we've got sort of lots of layers all layered on top of each other. And what I imagined was looking at time through the rocks. So quite often when they do like archaeological digs, they can tell what sort of date things were around based on the different layers that they find in the rocks and in the ground. So a very simplified sort of version of that is using these colours that we've been using all the way through, and taking different items such as carrier bags and bits of buttons and beads and things that I've found that I've had lying around. Quite often you'll have spare buttons given to you when you buy, like, say, a shirt. You'll get a couple of spare buttons. Now, I never throw them away. I always have them in a little box and use them for things like this. Okay, so these are the materials that you'll need for the time-themed picnic blanket square. We've got our same sort of selection of paints, and we've still got our beads and bits and pieces. Again, we're going to have lots of found objects from around the home, and I think for this one it'd be really cool to focus on maybe some sort of recycled items. So we have a plastic carrier bag and some bubble wrap here. We also have some bottle tops, and we also have some ribbon that came off an old item of clothing, and some threads as before. Also some felt again, we might use that, we might not, it depends on what we design, and some pins and paintbrushes, and also our paper and pens. So that's what we'll be needing for today. Again, as I say, everyone's will be different because we are all using stuff that we found around our house. So this is a sort of quite abstract look at how we feel about time, and looking at it from maybe quite an artistic point of view and seeing how, how we can translate something so large as the concept of time into a small square, that we're going to make in an afternoon or a couple of days. So for this one, I think we need to start with a few questions and think about time itself, because it's a huge topic. So I've put together a couple of sort of questions and done some doodles, so I'll show you them in a minute properly, and we'll go through sort of the design process. Okay, so like I said, I've started off with writing a few sort of subjects around the theme of time. So when we think of time, we quite often think of the past, the present and the future. Now, my first piece that I made definitely looked towards the past. So for this second one, I was quite keen to go all the way over to the future for this second piece. So when we think of the future, we think of several different things. We think of the distant future, things that are going to happen in years and years and years. And we think of the things that might happen in the near future. So maybe that's going to school or to college. So I've split it up into a couple of things that first sprang to mind. So I was thinking of the distant future, and I always think of flying cars when I think of the distant future. That's once we've got flying cars, we've made it. And then that made me think of space travel as well, and that is something that is kind of on the horizon, I guess, in terms of space travel for the general public, rather than being, trained as an astronaut and going on a space mission. And then this is another one that is really important to me, is to stop and also reverse climate change. The way we're going at the moment, it's looking quite bleak in terms of our planet. So in the future, I'd really love to see, climate change not even be an issue. So to move on to the near future, things that are a bit more maybe tangible, things that you feel you might have a bit more control over. So for me, that's learning new things. I like to learn new skills, be that with my art. I also wrote down but making better choices. Now this links me back up to the climate change subject matter. So making better choices. So thinking about how we can buy things more responsibly, use less plastic, etc. And then that also comes on to caring for more animals. I have a couple of pets. I would really like more. And it is something that I'd quite like to do in the future, is maybe foster animals. But then that also does link back into the climate change and recycling sort of debate, thinking about, the sea life that needs caring for. So these were the doodles that I put together. Now in the second video, the one just before this one where we were talking about home, I did a few doodles based on some questions and then thought of a way to amalgamate them all into a design piece. Now this one is quite different from the one that I've come up with in the past, this piece here. And it's more of a sort of symbol, I guess. But this is what I've come up with. It's absolutely ridiculous, but I think it could work. So bear with me. So we have a clock face here, symbolising time. We also have our 3 arrows that represent reduce, reuse, recycle. And in the centre we have a fish, which represents the animals that I'd like to care for, and also the sea life that need all the help they can get. I think using recycled materials for something along these lines could work and be quite striking as a design. So this is what we're going to transfer onto our fabric, and we're going to design it using our recycled and found objects. So I'll show you what it looks like on the fabric. So in the previous video, I showed you a way of using your paper drawing, cutting it out and using it as a template to attach it onto your fabric. Another way you can do this is by using quite a heavy marker pen to draw your design. And if your fabric is sort of light enough and thin enough and lit well, you can actually see the design through the fabric. So we're going to take this same pen again, this friction pen that I said about in the previous video, and I'm going to just sketch out part of the design. Okay, so we have our design traced out onto our fabric. Now it's really roughly done, but it's just to give me an idea of where items will go in the square. So I'm going to take some of the recycled objects that I've had lying around, and I think I'm just going to play around with them. So I've got these bottle tops here, and I think these would work quite well on the clock face. Oh, these ones stuck together. So I think these could work really well placed like so. We also need to think about how we're going to create the fish in the centre. Now one option is to fill it in with maybe some beads, but I think that might be a bit bulky. So another option is to use some of the recycled materials that we've found. And I thought of maybe using bubble wrap to create the fish. So I think what we might do is cut the fish out of bubble wrap and use paint on it to create our fish for the centre. Okay, so I've stitched on these ring pulls onto the design. I've just used a few tacking stitches in between the holes where it's convenient to join them. However, I have decided that I want to actually paint the black background of the clock face. So obviously it would be better to do it before you've stitched these on, but we'll paint round them, so it's not a huge problem. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to paint round this clock face and also paint my little bubble wrap fish that I've created. So this is just from a little bit of bubble wrap, and I've drawn the fish shape out. So we're going to paint him as well. Okay, so while we're waiting for our blue background and our fish to dry, I want to try and create these arrows around the outside. And I think for that, I'm going to use this yellow felt. And again, because this is quite thin craft felt, you can actually see your design underneath. So all I'm going to do is I'm just going to trace out my pieces. What I suggest you do is trace them out slightly larger than you need them. So you're just tracing just outside the lines that you've drawn. So the first one's going to be here. Now remember, we want to try and save as much of this fabric as possible. So instead of trying to do each one where they are on the paper, we're actually just going to change them around, and we're just going to trace out the next one just below it. So you can see here our next arrow is just here. Okay, now when we cut these out, we will be cutting out just inside this line, so you won't get any of the black marker pen on your finished felt. So it's just another thing to consider when you're tracing certain things onto your fabric. And then the third and final one. Okay, great. So we're going to cut them out, and we will be attaching them onto our final piece when everything is dry. Okay, so you'll notice I've done a few bits off camera. First of all, I've stitched our arrows on. Now I've done that on a sewing machine just for speed, but absolutely do it by hand if you haven't got a machine. You'll notice also I've stitched on my painted bubble wrap in the shape of a fish, and then I've also added a few outlines with a Sharpie, just to really make the design sort of pop a bit, and the colours really complement each other, I think, with a sort of black outline in between. One thing I do want to do is use some embroidery floss or embroidery thread to create a pattern around the inside of this clock face before I add any beads or anything else to it. And so to do that, I'm going to use what we call a chain stitch. So it's a different type of stitch to what we've been using before. So what I'm going to do is start off and sort of demonstrate how you do so. So I'm going to do it on the inside, just inside these black lines that I've done. So I'm going to start at each ring pull. So I'm just going to come up through the fabric. I've got a knot on the end, obviously. And so I'm just going to come up, and then what I'm going to do is put my needle right back into where I've just come up through. To do that, I'm going to go just next to that, just so I don't catch the thread, but I'm just going to go straight next to it. And then when you pull your thread through, what you want to do is leave a small loop. So don't pull it all the way through like you would with a normal stitch. And then for the length of your chain, it's totally up to you. But I'm just sort of going to go, yeah, maybe that's about 1/2 centimetre just over. And you come up in between your loop of thread. So when you pull it tight, you end up with a sort of loop of thread. So the same thing again. You use your needle to go right in just where you've just come up through. And again, you just leave a little loop. Okay, so we're going to come up, we're going to go, say, maybe about 1/2 centimetre. Yeah, that's about right. And we're going to just loop our thread over our needle and pull it through. And then as you pull it, you'll see it gets taut. And so again. And then you just want to keep doing that all the way around. It's a little bit more time consuming than normal stitching, I guess, but you do end up with quite a interesting pattern rather than just, say, a normal straight line of thread. So we're going to go again, and you see we've got our chain. So I'm going to do that all the way around. Oh, gone wrong. So when that happens, don't worry, you can pick it up through your needle like so. And what you can do is you loop this bit through your previous loop. So it can be a bit fiddly, but it is salvageable when you make a mistake, you see? So then we're going to carry on as normal. It's a little bit far. There we go. Okay, so here you can see I've completed the chain stitch around the outside edge, and I've also stitched a little ring and bead onto the fish's eye. Next up, I think finally, I'm going to be using some beads. Now these are all just various beads that I've either had off of jewellery, or sometimes you can pick beads up in charity shops or from craft stores. And I'm going to use these beads to, this one doesn't want to stay, to indicate the other numbers on my clock face. So let's see. Yeah, so I've put little dots onto my my design just so I can see where they're going to sit. So I think this looks quite nice. I might play around with the placement a little bit. So I might put that one there, maybe that one there and that one there, just to see, you know, how it looks until I'm happy with it. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to stitch them all on using just a normal needle and a thread. So when you're stitching with beads, one tip that I will give you is to make sure that your needle is thin enough to fit through the bead. Now that might seem like an obvious thing, but sometimes you'll get really, really teeny weeny holes in beads, and you might manage to get it onto your needle, but it won't fit any further than the eye of the needle. So you want to test every single one and make sure you can actually get it on. So that's one tip that I will give you. So what I might do is, with my design, I'm going to transfer my beads over onto my design. So first of all, this is going to be quite simple, and what we're going to do is we're going to make sure we've got a really long bit of thread, because when you're adding beads, it's actually stronger to, instead of after each and every bead tie a knot and cut your thread, it's actually stronger to carry on your thread on the back underneath side of your fabric, and then come up again where your next bead should be. So I'll show you how to do that. So I'm just going to come up where my little dot is, my first dot, and I can see that this one is this sort of flat one. Now this is a really tiny hole, so I did check to make sure that I can actually get them all the way through. Okay, so that one's going to go all the way through. And what we're going to do is put the needle back down a little further across, because it's quite a wide bead. It doesn't need to, the thread doesn't need to go in and out of the same hole. So can you see we've added our first bead. Now the best thing to do is go through each bead maybe once or twice. I'd say bigger ones you'd want to go through maybe a few more times, just because they can be a bit bulky. So I will go through this one a second time. So you want to come up through your fabric about where the edge of the bead is. Where are we? There we are. So we're going to come up through our fabric again. Ooh, we're hooked on our scissors. Come up through the fabric. And we're going to go through that same hole again. avoiding the chain stitch. Oop, knocked my camera. And then back down. Okay, and so that feels a lot more secure now I've done it a second time. So we're on the underneath of our fabric again, so we're going to come up where our next hole is. Whoop. Where our next hole is just about there. Right, lovely. And we are going to take our next bead, which is this runaway bead, and we're going to go through again. And it's going to be a similar process, so we're going to just put the needle back through. Oh, and we caught on the eye. So the thing, when you're doing a bit of 3D stuff, quite often you'll find you get your thread caught up quite a lot. So you want to go slow so that you can not cause any damage when that does happen. Okay, so we're going to go through again, on this side again, and back through our bead. Pulling it nice and tight, and back into the fabric, and back onto the back. Okay, lovely. So I'm going to carry on doing that all the way around. So there we go, guys. I've finished adding all of my beads around my fish. And I noticed they almost look a little bit like planets. So actually that sort of ties into my my ideas around space travel and flying cars. So we've ticked that box as well in terms of the things we've thought about in our sort of questions and our doodling. So we've got two very, very different takes on time and what time means to us. So there's no right or wrong. Whatever you decide time means to you, you pull them answers out, all of them doodles that you've put down, and create something that looks like a little fish on a pizza, you know, and actually it will come out looking quite spectacular. Just gather as many bits and pieces around the house as you can, so that when you do design your piece, you have lots of different bits to play with. So you won't necessarily use everything that you've found around the house, but it does mean that you've got lots of nice materials to work with, so that you can look at things in a slightly different way. So yeah, that's it. This is the last video in terms of the picnic blanket squares. So there's 3 in total. Check out the others if you haven't seen them ones before. Create as many squares as you can. And remember, don't feel the need to go out and buy new materials for this project. We really want you to use the things that you found around the home. If you haven't got a certain thing but you feel like you are able to buy it, then feel free. But we'd really like this to be as cost friendly as possible. So I'm really looking forward to seeing what you come up with, especially around the other ones where we can maybe make some more peculiar design ideas. And yeah, we'll join them together, we'll make a fantastic picnic blanket, and we will celebrate at the Future Fossil site in Oxley Park. Thank you. Bye.